Since I don't work in a large corporation, I've often wondered what is the effect on individuals within a corporate culture that has adopted diversity and inclusion initiatives. Is it just a nuisance that you pay lip service to and then get back to doing your job? You know, you attend a seminar or a workshop, sit attentively, or at least pretend to, as you're told about your unconscious bias. You nod your head and pledge to work harder to be more inclusive. But then you go back to your desk and you just get on with doing what you're actually paid to do. Or does it really affect your job and your prospects for promotion within the organisation? I guess it depends on how seriously your company takes it and how hard they push their initiatives. From the James Damore experience, it would seem you can't really ignore it if you work at Google. We found out in April this year that Microsoft is financially incentivising diversity measures in hiring decisions that one Microsoft employee described as discriminatory, in that case discriminating against Asian and white men. A few years back in Australia, ANZ Bank decided that they would contribute $500 a year more to female employees only to bridge the so-called superannuation gap. I didn't hear of any male resignations over this policy, so I suspect anyone that disagreed just bit their tongue and kept quiet. And I get it. Let's say you're in your mid-40s, you've worked your way up the corporate ladder, you've got a six-figure income, a mortgage on a nice house and 2 kids in private school. Why rock the boat? Just mouth the platitudes they want you to, and so what if you have to promote some people on the basis of innate characteristics rather than competency? A few diversity hires in a large organisation is not going to affect things too much, and besides, if the business does tank, by the time that happens, you'll have one foot out the door anyway. Perhaps it's different if you're just starting out in your career. If you know you're going into an organisation that overtly discriminates against you, do you feel discouraged? It doesn't appear so in Silicon Valley, where virtue signalling has strong support. These companies are still the ones the best and brightest want to work for. And they can't afford to alienate males anyway, since they're still picking up close to 80% of computer science degrees in the US. Even the recent controversy around Harvard's discrimination against Asian students hasn't deterred Asian students from wanting to go there, at least not yet. Now, we should acknowledge that people drop out of the corporate world for all kinds of reasons and have for decades. They want to start their own businesses. They want more flexible working arrangements. I met an engineer recently that said he can earn almost double consulting for a company on a short-term basis than he would earn as a full-time employee of the same company. Of course, not everybody has the kind of skills that are in high demand, but of those who do decide to drop out of the corporate world, why do they do it? Now, you can find plenty of articles about why I left my well-paid corporate job, but it's much harder to find any data on the topic. However, luckily for us, Mr. Chris Whalen has done the work for us. Chris is a CPA that runs his own tax and advisory business in Red Bank, New Jersey. I'll leave a link in the comments. About 3 to 4 years ago, Chris started to notice slightly more men than average coming into his office who were leaving the corporate world to start their own businesses. Chris was curious to find out why, so he went back through his client base and interviewed men that had made this move during the past 4 years. He was careful to select only those men that had worked for organisations that had at least 500 employees and filter out those that were fired from their job, as he wanted to focus on voluntary terminations. This gave him a sample size of 93 men. From this sample, Chris notes, there were 5 reasons that kept coming up, and they are listed below. In only a few of these cases was there evidence that I was given to justify their decisions, but my clients all discussed their employment history at length and said that their decisions were extremely hard to make, but their employment was untenable. And he provides this chart showing the breakdown amongst those 5 reasons. So the most popular reason given by 37 men, or approximately 40%, was, not surprisingly, that they could earn more and have more flexible working arrangements for themselves. Chris commented that this is usually the reason men and women come to see him about starting their own company. This group mentioned no negatives at all about their former employers. They just knew they could earn more working for themselves. The second most popular reason cited by about a quarter of the respondents was that they had been passed over for a promotion, even though they were the best qualified for the job, and sometimes, according to Chris, multiple times. Some mentioned their former employers' push for gender and racial equality, which was sometimes proudly broadcast to the media as the reason. As Chris notes, there's no way of knowing if these men were in fact more qualified, but we do know there are certain companies that are promoting and hiring people along these lines, so it's not far-fetched to think that this has happened to some of Chris's clients. The third most popular reason cited was because there were no clear rules for interacting with women. Chris describes this category in the following way. The crux of this category is that there's no presumption of innocence and no guarantee of due process if an allegation of harassment is levelled against men. Also, there is no corporate punishment if a woman makes a public charge against a man. I assume he means a false or unproven allegation, which is interesting given that the common narrative is that women are reticent to come forward precisely because of possible repercussions. He goes on to say that these men found it impossible to work alongside women comfortably, knowing even a false allegation could ruin their careers and their lives. That sentiment was echoed in the leanin.org survey that I reported on a couple of weeks ago, which showed more men, in that case male managers, are feeling uncomfortable participating in common job-related activities with women such as mentoring, working alone together, or socialising. Now, it doesn't surprise me that this would be a factor, but for this many men in the sample to cite this as the major reason is at least a little surprising to me. Given what Chris says later in this piece about all his clients being brilliant, I assume they're able to transfer their skills fairly easily to running their own enterprises. So it begs the question, what about others that don't have that ability and can't easily escape that atmosphere? And even if you can find a similar job somewhere else rather than starting your own business, there's a good chance, unless you go to a much smaller company, that you'll have to dance to the tune of the diversity and inclusion dog whistle. The fourth reason cited was that some of the men, 11 of the 93, anticipated that corporations will, in the future, discriminate against men. Chris notes that none of these men reported being passed over for promotion, but it was very clear to them that merit was no longer the driving force for hiring and also would not be for promotions. 8 of the men in this group cited news reports of corporations being pressured to have gender equality on their boards. They also saw females being hired without the proper qualifications to satisfy this same gender equality agenda within their departments and others. So essentially these guys see the writing on the wall and are making a preemptive move. Smart. And again, the ones that can get out and make a go of it will be the lucky ones. Those that are stuck there will have to suck it up, or if they're smart, they could go get a job with the guys that left to set up their own business. The final reason put forth by 5 men was that they were marginalised due to their race or gender. Chris notes that these men did not experience promotion problems per se, but were made to feel uncomfortable being a man working with women. Many of them mentioned corporate memos and pronouncements related to educating men about how they should be acting. They heard words like toxic masculinity openly discussed. Caucasian men, 3 out of this 5 in this category, felt attacked, maligned, mocked and shunned, and they had no support from their direct superiors or human resources departments. Most mentioned open hostility towards men, bringing 0 punishment. And this is exactly what is alleged in another lawsuit against Google that I reported on in early 2018. Here's a much younger me from a year ago. So Guterman worked for Google for approximately 3 years, from October 2013 to December 2016, when he was fired. Now, Guterman is described as a conservative, a Caucasian, and a male, which basically makes him the living incarnation of evil. The lawsuit claims that Guterman was discriminated against and harassed and ultimately fired on the basis of these characteristics. So in August 2015, Kim Burchett, an L7 SWE manager, drafted and published a document on a Google employees-only website entitled Derailing. This document discussed how individuals might attempt to silence someone's opinions or distract from someone's point of view. The document was aimed at Caucasian males and conflated marginalisation with white male privilege. The document essentially claimed through examples that any response but agreement to a statement about bias, prejudice or privilege was a derailment, reductio ad absurdum. The thesis of this document is that on this one particular set of topics, the left-wing political frame of systemic bias must always dominate, and the receiver must accept that frame and its associated worldview in their response. And that document, which I will leave a link to, has an abundance of supporting evidence. So other than the top reason, which accounts for 40% of the 93 men, the remaining 60% all relate in one way or another to diversity initiatives. And again, we have no way of verifying their claims, but I'd be alarmed if it was even half that amount. Chris concludes the piece by stating that, although this took a tremendous amount of work for me and my team, I'm so glad that we did it. Working at the street level, I have a unique lens on how things impact real, everyday, hard-working people. I think this trend will escalate as the reasons cited above are not being addressed seriously. All of these clients are brilliant, and I see this as a brain drain that will cause these large corporations to lose profits in the long run if this trend continues. And he's probably right about that, although I would say the flip side is that if it inspires truly talented people to go out and build their own much smaller companies, that could be a very good development as well. Small companies generally don't have the time or resources to waste on unproductive diversity measures. It's tough enough just to find good people. They're usually more nimble and can adapt faster to a changing business environment. And the small companies of today will be the big companies of tomorrow. My admittedly speculative prediction is that at some point in the future, maybe a decade or two from now, diversity and inclusion initiatives will be seen as just another fad adopted by corporations that ultimately didn't live up to its advertising. But who really knows? Perhaps it will become even worse. Even small firms will be investigated by diversity ideologues and then be publicly shamed for not having a demographically balanced workforce. Perhaps the word workforce will be replaced with wokeforce, and you won't have any employees, you'll just have wokies. All I know is that I definitely wouldn't fit in, and I suspect I'm not the only one. As usual, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'll see you next time.